They told me the surgery could wait. My own son had $9 million sitting in a brokerage account, and his stepmother looked me in the eye and said maybe I should ask my daughter instead. My daughter, who was working double shifts at a pediatric clinic and eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch so she could make rent. That sentence has lived in my chest like a splinter I can't reach ever since. I didn't say anything back to Donna that night. 63 years old. I just sat there at my own kitchen table and nodded like what she'd said made perfect sense. But I need you to understand something before I get into the rest of this. This isn't a story about money. Not at its core. It's a story about who you find out you are to the people who are supposed to love you when you've got nothing left to give them. Let me back up. My name is Walter Greer. I live in a ranch house off Route 9 outside Dalton, Georgia. The kind of house that's too big for one person and too quiet after 20 years of footsteps in the hallway. The carpet in the living room needs replacing. There's a crack in the ceiling above the bathroom that I keep meaning to patch. I've been meaning to for about 4 years now. It was a Thursday evening in October, cool enough that I'd turned the heat on for the first time of the season, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of mail I'd been avoiding for 3 days. A past due notice from the gas company. A letter from my insurance carrier that I already knew was bad news, because good news doesn't arrive in an envelope that heavy. Donna's phone buzzed on the counter. I watched her whole face change. The way it only ever changes for one reason anymore. Marcus. She said it the way some people say a prayer. She turned toward the window, angling herself away from me like she needed privacy for this particular conversation, like I was furniture she'd learned to work around. Oh my goodness, tell me everything. She was smiling now, that smile I haven't seen directed at me in longer than I can remember. 9 million? Marcus, that is incredible. You are so brilliant. Do you know that? I set my coffee mug down. 9 million. I sat there and listened to my wife of 11 years. Talk to my son like he'd just parted the Red Sea instead of closed a deal. On a real estate fund that my 35 years of construction work probably helped finance in ways neither of them would ever admit. I'm not saying that to be bitter. I'm saying it because you need to understand what the weather was like in that house before I tell you what the storm looked like. She hung up eventually, walked back to the table still glowing, and the warmth fell off her face the second she looked at me, like a light switching off. He's doing so well, Walter. She slid the gas bill across the table without looking at it. Can you handle this before Friday? She didn't ask about the cough I'd had for 6 weeks. Didn't ask about the appointment I'd come home from 3 days earlier looking like a man who'd had something taken out of him. She just pushed that bill across the table and picked her phone back up. That's the kind of sentence that tells you everything you need to know about a marriage. Not the fighting, not the silence, the bill sliding. I'm going to be honest with you the way I wish someone had been honest with me 20 years ago. I wasn't always the man sitting at that table struggling to cover a gas bill. 22 years ago, I owned a mid-sized electrical contracting business out of Whitfield County. 43 employees. Good reputation. The kind of company where people called you by your first name and meant it respectfully. Then 2008 happened. And it happened to a lot of us. I know that. But what happened to me specifically was that my business partner, a man named Dennis Howell, had been quietly over-leveraging our shared commercial real estate portfolio for 2 years without telling me. 3 properties, mortgaged against the company's equity. When the market dropped, it dropped fast, and Dennis's name was on the liability clauses. Mine was on everything else. I lost the business, not because I gambled, because I trusted the wrong man. There is a difference, though I understand if people who weren't there might not see it that way. Marcus was 13 when it happened, old enough to remember the house we had before, old enough to feel the difference between private school and public school, between vacations and staycations, between a father who coached his little league team and a father who was on the phone with lawyers every night trying to keep the lights on. He's carried that with him. I understand it. Understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't cut you. My daughter Grace is different. She was 9 when the company went under, young enough that what she remembers isn't what we lost. She remembers me making her breakfast every morning anyway. She remembers sitting on the tailgate of my old truck, while I explained to her why things were going to be different for a while. She's 29 now. Works as a medical assistant at a pediatric clinic in Chattanooga, about 35 minutes from here. She doesn't make much. She doesn't complain about it either. She came by 2 days after Donna's phone conversation with Marcus. She brought a pot of chicken soup, the kind with egg noodles and too much black pepper, exactly the way my mother used to make it. She set it on the stove and sat down across from me and looked at my face for a long time without saying anything. Dad. Her voice was careful. How bad is it? I told her about the cough, about the imaging they'd ordered, about the follow-up appointment I hadn't told anyone about yet. She didn't say a single word about money, or Marcus, or Donna. She just reached across the table and put her hand on top of mine and said, "I'm going to that appointment with you. Don't argue." I didn't argue. The doctor's name was Pullman. He was a careful man, the kind who chooses every word like he's picking something up that might break. He set the folder down on his desk and looked at me the way doctors look at you when they're about to ask you to be braver than you think you can be. "Walter, the mass on your left kidney is operable. That's the important part. But we need to move on this. We're talking weeks, not months." He said it straight. I appreciated that. A woman from the billing department came in afterward. Name of Patricia. She had the look of someone who delivers this particular news many times a week and has never fully made peace with it. My insurance had a gap, a specific exclusion in my plan for the surgical approach Dr. Pullman wanted to use. Out-of-pocket deposit before they would schedule the OR. $4,000. Hospital policy. Non-negotiable. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time after that. A 2011 F-150 with a heater that works on the left side only. I did the math about 8 different ways. Every single time it came out the same. I didn't have it. My credit had never fully recovered from the business collapse. Dennis's liability clause had protected him legally, but the collateral damage to my personal finances had taken years to untangle, and at 63, driving an electrical inspector's route for the county, I wasn't exactly accumulating savings at any pace that helped me now. $4,000. My son had $9 million. I told myself I wouldn't call him. I held out for 3 days. Then I called him anyway, because that's what a father does. You set down whatever pride you've managed to hold on to, and you call your child, and you hope, against everything you know, that he's still the boy you used to read to sleep at night. He picked up on the third ring. I could hear a restaurant in the background. Silverware. Someone laughing. "Dad, hey, I'm actually in the middle of a dinner meeting, can I?" "Marcus, I need 5 minutes. This is important." A pause. Then, flat. "Go ahead." I told him everything. The mass, the surgery, the gap in coverage, the $4,000 I needed before they'd put me on the schedule. The silence on his end lasted long enough that I started to think the call had dropped. Then, Dad. His voice had changed, gone from flat to something colder. "I love you. I do. But I've spent the last 22 years digging out of the hole your business decisions put this family in. I put myself through law school. I built everything I have without any help from anyone. And I can't just... Marcus, this is surgery. This is... I know what it is." Another pause. "Ask the hospital about a payment plan. They all have them. That's what they're there for." Then, quieter, in a way that was somehow worse. "I'm not in a position to keep being the safety net for decisions I didn't make." He hung up. I called Donna next. Asked if she'd talk to him, soften it. "Walter, don't you dare put him in the middle of this." Her voice went sharp, the way it gets when she's protecting something she values more than me. "He has a reputation now. He has clients and partners who watch everything. You cannot keep running to him with your problems." She paused. "What about Grace? She's a medical professional. Maybe she has resources for this kind of thing." A medical professional. Grace made $31,000 a year taking temperatures and drawing blood at a pediatric clinic. Donna knew that. She just knew something else more. I hung up and sat in that quiet house and thought about things I didn't have the energy to feel yet. Now, here is where I have to tell you something important, friends. I wasn't going to ask Grace. I had decided that. She was working herself to the bone already. She deserved to have her father protect her for once, instead of leaning on her. But Grace had other ideas. She showed up 2 days later at 7 in the morning, still in her scrubs from a night shift she hadn't told me she'd picked up. She looked tired, in that specific way that young people look tired when they're running on something other than sleep. Determination, maybe. Love. Whatever word fits that thing where a person shows up anyway. She sat down at my kitchen table and slid something across it. An envelope. Grace, before you say anything. Her voice was steady in a way that told me she'd been rehearsing this, or maybe just deciding it so firmly that no rehearsal was necessary. There's $3,200 in there. Cash. I've been saving it since February, just kind of generally, and I know it's not the full amount, so here. She turned her phone screen toward me. A loan confirmation email. $800 from a personal loan she'd applied for at midnight. That gets you to $4,000. She folded her hands on the table. You call Dr. Pullman's office this morning and you get on that schedule. My throat closed completely. I also need you to know, she said, and her eyes went wet but her voice didn't waver, that I don't want you to pay me back. I mean it. I know you will anyway, because that's who you are. But I'm telling you in advance that it doesn't matter to me. I couldn't speak for a moment. Just looked at my 29-year-old daughter in her borrowed scrubs at 7 in the morning, having worked all night, handing me her savings account like it was nothing. Grace. I finally got her name out. You need that money. I need you to be alive, she said. Simple as that. Everything else is math. I went into surgery on a Tuesday morning in November. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia took me was Grace sitting in the pre-op waiting area with a cup of bad hospital coffee and a word search book she'd brought to keep herself calm. She looked up and waved when they wheeled me past, and she smiled like everything was already fine. I woke up 4 hours later with a soreness in my side like I'd been hit by something large, and Dr. Pullman standing at the end of my bed looking like a man who'd just gotten the answer he was hoping for. Clean margins, Walter. We got it all. Grace drove me home 3 days later, set me up in the recliner with a blanket and the remote, and went to the kitchen to make soup, and didn't let me lift a thing for a week. I watched her moving around my house, doing dishes and answering my phone, and managing things with a quiet efficiency that made me ache in a way the surgery never had. I thought about Marcus in some restaurant with $9 million and a reputation to protect. I thought about the 9-year-old girl who had sat on the tailgate of my truck while I explained that things were going to be different. She'd listened. That was the difference. She'd actually listened. I was 3 weeks out of surgery, still moving a little slow, still sleeping more than I was used to, when the mail came that changed the shape of everything. Grace had gone to work. I was alone in the house, which had been my house before the divorce from her mother and was still technically mine. The mortgage paid off 6 years ago from what little remained after the business collapsed. I went to the mailbox in my robe and came back with 3 pieces of mail. 2 of them were nothing. The third had a return address I recognized and didn't expect. A law firm out of Atlanta, Harwick, Delaney, and Associates. They had represented Dennis Howell's estate. Dennis Howell had died in August. I hadn't known. We hadn't spoken in 12 years. I sat down at the kitchen table and read the letter twice, then a third time. Dennis had died without direct heirs. His estate, after debts, had passed to a trust. The trust's designated executor, a provision Dennis had apparently added 4 years ago, according to the attorney's note, possibly out of something like conscience, had identified me as a creditor with an unresolved claim stemming from the 2008 partnership dissolution. His estate included a commercial property in Cobb County, the same property that had been mortgaged against our partnership's equity in 2008. The property that had sat underwater for 12 years, locked in probate and lien disputes that the attorney summarized in 4 dense paragraphs I read 3 times each. The lien had cleared. The property had been sold at market rate in September. After debts, after legal fees, after 12 years of compounding interest on the original claim, a claim I had filed and forgotten about, somewhere around 2012, when my lawyer told me I'd likely never see a dime, my portion of the recovered equity came to a number I read so many times. The paper started to feel soft in my hands. $11,200,000. $200,000. I set the letter down on the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard for a long time. The grass needed cutting. It always needed cutting this time of year. 11 million. 3 weeks ago, I had been trying to figure out how to cover a $4,000 surgery deposit. I picked up my phone and called an attorney. Not a friend, not family. An attorney named Carol Yates, out of Chattanooga, who I'd used years ago for estate planning and who I trusted because she had never once told me what I wanted to hear, just to be kind. That was the quality I needed right now. "Carol," I said, "I need you to pull something for me." And then I told her about a document. You see, when Marcus was 26 and freshly passed the bar, he had come to me with a proposal. He was worried, he said, about my remaining liabilities from the business collapse. He was worried that if anything ever came back on me legally, it could create problems for him, his license, his reputation, his professional standing. He needed to protect himself. And I had let him, because he was my son and I understood, and I wanted to help him in whatever way I still could. He'd had his own attorney draw up a family liability separation agreement. The operative effect was this. I acknowledged sole responsibility for all debts, claims, and obligations arising from the Howell partnership. Marcus was formally separated from any connection to those liabilities. It was clean and legal, and at the time, I had thought it was the right thing to do for my son. What I had never thought about, and what I asked Carol to confirm now, was whether that same agreement in separating Marcus cleanly from the liabilities of the partnership also separated him cleanly from anything that came back the other direction. Carol called me the next morning. "Walter," she said, and I could hear papers on her end. "I'm going to read you something. The language in Section 4 of this agreement states, and I'm quoting directly here, Walter J. Greer acknowledges sole and exclusive ownership of all assets, liabilities, interests, claims, and rights arising from or connected to the Howell-Greer partnership, including any past, present, or future recovery, settlement, or proceeds related thereto." "Fire." She paused. "All future recovery," I said. "Every dime," Carol said. "Marcus didn't just protect himself from your debts, Walter. He signed himself out of anything that ever came back the other way. Under Tennessee and Georgia contract law, this is unambiguous. The recovery from the Howell estate belongs entirely to you, solely and completely." I sat with that for a moment. "Carol." My voice came out quieter than I expected. "I need you to help me set up a trust." I spent the next 10 days healing and making arrangements. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call Donna. I thought about it more than once, and every time I thought about it, I thought about Grace in her scrubs at 7 in the morning sliding an envelope across my kitchen table. I thought about the loan confirmation she'd shown me, $800 at an interest rate I didn't want to know. I thought about the soup she'd made, the way she'd waved at me from the waiting room like everything was already fine. I thought about the fact that she was $31,000 a year trying to make a life, and she had handed me everything she had without blinking. The trust was irrevocable. Grace's name. The full amount, after legal fees and the taxes that Carol helped me plan for. The first thing I did before anything else was call the personal loan company and pay off Grace's $800 and the interest that had already accrued on it. Then I made one more call, a realtor I knew, who handled residential property in Hamilton County. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Marcus found out the way I suspected he might, through professional channels. He had contacts in the Atlanta legal community, and the Howell estate recovery had generated enough paperwork that it wasn't invisible to someone who knew what to look for. He called on a Wednesday evening, then called again. Then he showed up. He knocked on my door at 6:30 with Donna right behind him, which told me this had been coordinated, that they'd spoken, that whatever was about to happen had been rehearsed in a car on the way over. Grace was there. She'd come by to drop off groceries, still in her work clothes, and she answered the door before I could get up from the recliner. I heard her voice from the hallway, quiet, measured. "What's going on?" Marcus pushed past her, without answering her. Donna followed. And I want you to picture this scene clearly, friends, because I need you to understand what these two people looked like when they walked into my living room. Marcus in a good suit, the kind that costs more than Grace's monthly rent, but with something wrong in his face, a tightness around the mouth. The look of a man who has run the numbers and found out they don't add up the way he expected. Donna behind him, arms folded, face set the way it gets when she's already decided something and is just here for the formality. Neither one of them looked at me and asked how I was recovering. Not one word about the surgery. Dad. Marcus's voice had that professional evenness he uses when he's controlling something. We need to talk about the Howell settlement. Owl. Sit down, Marcus, I said. You look like you've been running. He didn't sit. I know about the recovery, he said. Carol Yates filed the trust documents through Hamilton County. I have a colleague who flagged it. 11.2 million, Dad. And you set up an irrevocable trust without telling me. Without telling anyone. Donna stepped forward. Walter, that is family money. Whatever you feel about the past, that money comes from a partnership that affected this entire family. We all suffered for those years. We are all owed something from this. We all suffered. I thought about Grace's savings account. I thought about the loan at midnight. Marcus. I kept my voice even. I'd had 10 days to get even. When you were 26, you came to me with a legal document. You were worried about your license and your reputation. You needed me to sign something that separated you from my liabilities. A flicker in his face. I signed it because I wanted to help you, because you were my son and I would have signed anything you asked me to. I paused. Do you remember what that document said about future recoveries? His jaw tightened. I had Carol pull the original, I said. Section 4. All future recovery, settlement, or proceeds related to the Howell Greer partnership. Sole and exclusive ownership. You wrote yourself out of the liabilities, Marcus. The same language wrote you out of everything else. That's not, he started. It's exactly what it is, I said. Your own agreement, your own language, your own attorney drafted it to protect you from my failures, and it protected me from having to share whatever came back. I reached into the folder on the side table and slid the document across the coffee table toward him. He looked down at it. Donna looked at it. Neither one of them spoke for a moment. Then Marcus looked up, and I could see him shifting, the way he does when one approach isn't working and he's cycling to the next one. Dad. Come on. You know that document wasn't meant to. I'm going to show you something else, I said. I picked up my phone and pulled up Grace's bank account. She had given me access when she was managing my bills after surgery and hadn't taken it back. I turned the screen around. $47, I said. That's what your sister has in her checking account this week. Because 4 weeks ago she drained her savings and took out a personal loan to get me on Dr. Pullman's schedule. She worked a night shift and showed up at 7 in the morning in her work clothes and put $3,200 in cash on this kitchen table and told me not to pay her back. I let that sit for a second, while you were at a dinner meeting telling me to ask about payment plans. Nobody said anything. The window unit hummed. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. I didn't hide this money from anyone, I said, and my voice had gone quieter, which somehow made the room go quieter too. I found out about it 3 weeks after surgery, sitting right here in this chair. I made the arrangements quietly, because I needed time to make sure it went where it needed to go. I looked at Marcus, then Donna, then back to Marcus. But I want to be honest with you both, and I want you to hear this clearly. Even if I'd had a year of warning, even if I'd known from the day Dennis died, it would not have changed one single thing about where this money went. Marcus opened his mouth. You told me my problems weren't your problems, I said. You said it in those exact words. And Donna, you told me not to put him in the middle of my issues. So I didn't. I didn't put either of you in the middle of any of it. Not the surgery, not the recovery, not the settlement. I folded my hands in my lap. The trust is irrevocable, and it's already finalized. Every dollar, after taxes and fees, goes to Grace. That's done. It cannot be undone. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The way you look at someone you've spent 35 years trying to know. You divorced yourself from this family a long time ago, Marcus. In your heart, you did. You signed the paperwork tonight. Marcus stood very still. That professional evenness was gone now. What was underneath it was harder to look at, because it was something real for the first time in a long time. Not anger. Something more complicated than anger. Donna started to speak. I raised one hand, gently. I think you should go, I said. Both of you. Please. They went. No slammed door, no last word. Just two people walking out of a house, realizing that the legal document Marcus had been so proud of, the one he'd drawn up to protect his future, was the exact document that had handed that future entirely to someone else. Grace stood in the kitchen doorway after the sound of Marcus's car had faded down Route 9. She was looking at me with something in her face I couldn't quite name. Dad, she said quietly. You didn't have to give me all of it. Yes, I said. I did. She crossed the room and sat on the arm of the recliner, the way she used to sit next to me on the couch when she was small and something had frightened her at school. I put my arm around her, careful of my side, and we sat there in the quiet of that too big, too quiet house. I thought about everything I was going to tell her. The new house I'd already asked the realtor to find her. Somewhere close enough that I could drive there in 20 minutes. The loan she'd taken out at midnight that was already paid down to zero. The trust that couldn't be touched or argued about or taken apart by any lawyer in the state of Georgia or Tennessee. I thought about $3,200 in cash on a kitchen table at 7 in the morning. I thought about a loan confirmation on a phone screen. I thought about everything that costs us nothing to give when we love someone, and everything it costs us when we don't. Cars can be replaced, she'd told me. I need you to be alive. Everything else is math. She was right. Turns out the math was better than either of us knew. We sat there together, my daughter and me, safe, quiet, finally free of the weight of everything that had been owed and unpaid for 22 long years. And somewhere across town, my son sat down that night to look at his own numbers and discovered that $9 million is a great deal of money, right up until the moment you realize the one person who might have stood by you anyway is sitting in a recliner off Route 9. And you burned that bridge yourself, over a dinner you don't even remember, at a restaurant whose name you'll forget before spring. Funny how the math works out sometimes. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop it in the comments below, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you on the next one.